The cards fell from Grace Vance's trembling fingers and scattered across the green felt table like autumn leaves in a bitter wind, each one representing another piece of her father's legacy slipping through her hands forever. Grace stared at the pile of chips in front of Marcus Holloway, the railroad man who had just won everything she owned in the world. The deed to her family's ranch, 200 acres of Oregon timber and grassland that her father had died protecting just 3 months ago, now belonged to a man who collected properties the way other men collected pocket watches. She could barely breathe as the reality crashed over her like a cold wave from the Columbia River. 23 years old, alone in the world since consumption had taken her mother when Grace was 16, and now she had gambled away the only thing her father had left her. "Well, Miss Vance," Holloway said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey, "I do appreciate you making this so easy. I have been trying to acquire that land for months. The railroad needs that route through your valley, and now nothing stands in my way." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. She had been so stupid, so desperately stupid. When the banker had come calling about the overdue mortgage payments, when he had suggested she might find a way to raise the money quickly, when he had mentioned the high-stakes game at the Silver Dollar Saloon, she had thought it was her only chance. She had taught herself poker watching her father play friendly games with the ranch hands. She had been good enough to win small pots at the church socials. But this had been different. These men were professionals, and she had been a fool. "You cheated," she whispered, though she had no proof. She had watched him carefully, but his hands had been too quick, too practiced. "Careful with accusations like that, miss," Holloway said, standing from the table. He was a tall man, well dressed in a wool suit that probably cost more than her ranch brought in during a good year. "You made your bets of your own free will. Every man at this table witnessed it fair and square." The 3 other men at the table, all of them in Holloway's pocket from what Grace could now see, nodded in agreement. She looked around the saloon desperately, hoping someone might stand up for her, but most of the patrons had the good sense to mind their own business. Getting involved in Marcus Holloway's affairs was a good way to end up unemployed or worse. Grace stood up so quickly her chair fell backward with a clatter. She could not let them see her cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. She pushed through the crowd toward the door, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall until she was outside. The cool April evening air hit her face as she stumbled onto the wooden sidewalk. Portland was growing fast in this year of 1883, with new buildings going up every week as more people flooded into Oregon, but tonight the town felt hostile and foreign. She had nowhere to go. The ranch house would not be hers by morning once Holloway filed the deed. She had maybe $3 in her reticule and the clothes on her back. The dark blue dress she wore had been her mother's, altered to fit Grace's taller, slimmer frame. Everything else, every single thing that mattered, was gone. "You all right, miss?" The voice came from her left, deep and concerned. Grace turned to see a man standing in the shadows beside the saloon, one boot propped against the wall. He was tall and lean, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he pushed away from the wall and stepped into the lamplight, she could see he was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean. "I am fine," Grace said automatically, though her voice broke on the last word. "No, you are not," he said simply. "I was in there. I saw what happened." "Then you saw me lose everything like an idiot," Grace said bitterly. "If you are looking for entertainment, I am not in the mood to provide it." "Name is Benjamin Walsh," he said, ignoring her sharp tone. "And I was not entertained. I was angry. Holloway is a cheat and everyone knows it, but he has got the sheriff in his pocket so nobody can prove anything. Well, knowing it does not help me much, Grace said. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. By tomorrow I will have nothing. Benjamin studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. That deed still has to be registered at the land office. Holloway will not do it until morning because the office is closed now. That gives us tonight. Us? Grace looked at him sharply. Why would you help me? What do you want? I want to see Marcus Holloway lose something for once, Benjamin said, and there was steel in his voice now. He ran my family out of a timber claim 2 years ago using the same tricks. Cost my father everything. My old man drank himself to death within 6 months. So when I say I want to help you, Miss Vance, I mean I want to take back what that snake stole from you. Grace felt a flicker of something she had not felt since the cards had fallen. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. How? He won your deed in a card game. I will win it back the same way, Benjamin said. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to tell me everything you know about what he has got planned for that land. The railroad, Grace said immediately. He wants to run a line through the valley. My father refused to sell because it would have cut right through our best grazing land and the creek. Without our property, they have to go miles out of the way through the mountains. Benjamin nodded slowly. So that deed is worth a lot more to him than just the land itself. He needs it to make his railroad deal work. That means he will play for it again if the stakes are right. But I have nothing left to stake, Grace said helplessly. No, but I do. Benjamin straightened his hat. I have been working cattle drives down in California for 2 years, saving every penny. I have got nearly $2,000 in a bank account in Sacramento, and I can wire for it first thing in the morning. In the meantime, I have got $300 on me that might be enough to get me into a game. You would risk your savings for a stranger. Grace could not quite believe what she was hearing. I told you, this is not just about you, Benjamin said, but his expression softened. Though I do not like seeing a woman cheated out of her birthright, my mother would come back from the grave and box my ears if I walked away from someone in trouble when I could help. Grace found herself almost smiling despite everything. Your mother sounds like she was a formidable woman. She was, Benjamin agreed. Now, do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Grace shook her head. I was planning to sleep in the livery stable, I suppose. Like hell, Benjamin said flatly. Pardon my language, but no. Mrs. Chen runs a boarding house 2 streets over. She is respectable, and she owes me a favor. You will stay there tonight, and tomorrow morning we are going to get your ranch back. He said it with such confidence that Grace almost believed it was possible. She knew she should not trust a stranger, knew that accepting help from a man she had just met could lead to expectations she was not prepared to meet. But what choice did she have? At least Benjamin Walsh seemed honest, and his anger at Holloway felt genuine. All right, she said finally. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Benjamin, he corrected. If we are going to be partners in taking down Marcus Holloway, you should probably use my first name. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Grace took it. They walked through the darkening streets of Portland, past the new brick buildings going up near the waterfront and the older wooden structures that had stood since the town was founded. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a neat 2-story building painted white with green shutters. A Chinese woman in her 50s answered Benjamin's knock, and her stern expression softened when she saw who it was. Mr. Walsh, she said warmly. I have not seen you in months. Come in, come in. Hello, Mrs. Chen. This is Miss Grace Vance, and she needs a room for the night. Possibly longer, Benjamin said. She has had some trouble. Mrs. Chen looked at Grace with sharp, assessing eyes that seemed to see everything. You look exhausted, child. Come, I have a room on the second floor. It is clean and quiet. Mr. Walsh, you will explain. In the morning, Benjamin promised. Right now, Miss Vance needs rest. Grace wanted to protest that she was too anxious to sleep, but the truth was she was exhausted. The emotional toll of the evening had drained her completely. Mrs. Chen led her upstairs to a small but spotlessly clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. After Mrs. Chen left, Grace sank onto the bed and finally let herself cry, quietly so no one would hear. She cried for her father, for her mother, for the home she had lost, and for the girl she had been that morning who had still thought she could fix everything. Eventually, the tears stopped because there were no more left. Grace washed her face in the basin, said her prayers more desperately than she had in years, and lay down fully clothed on top of the quilt. Sleep came in fits and starts, troubled by dreams of cards falling endlessly from her hands. She woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of bacon cooking somewhere below. For a moment, she was disoriented, and then everything came rushing back. Grace sat up quickly, her heart pounding. What time was it? Had Holloway already registered the deed? She hurried downstairs to find Mrs. Chen in the kitchen and Benjamin sitting at the dining table, eating breakfast. He stood when he saw her. "Good, you are awake," he said. "I have been to the telegraph office already. My bank is wiring the money, but it will take a few hours to arrive. In the meantime, I checked with the land office. Holloway has not shown up yet." Grace felt some of the panic ease. "So we still have time." "We do. Sit down and eat something. You look like you have not had a proper meal in days." He was not wrong. Grace had been stretching her supplies for weeks, trying to make everything last while she figured out how to pay the mortgage. Mrs. Chen brought her a plate of bacon, eggs, and toast, and Grace ate ravenously despite her nerves. "I have been thinking about how to approach this," Benjamin said, nursing a cup of coffee. "Holloway will not just agree to play for the deed. We need to make him think he is getting something valuable, something worth more than your ranch." "But what could be worth more to him than the railroad route?" Grace asked. "Information," Benjamin said slowly, "or the promise of something bigger. I have heard rumors that the Northern Pacific is planning a major expansion through Oregon. If Holloway thinks I have insider knowledge about where they are planning to buy land, he might be willing to risk your deed for a chance at an even bigger score." "But you do not actually have that information," Grace pointed out. "No, but he does not know that," Benjamin said. "I can be convincing when I need to be. I spent 6 months working as a car dealer in San Francisco before I went back to cattle driving. I know how to run a bluff." Grace studied him across the table. In the morning light, she could see the details she had missed last night. Benjamin Walsh was a handsome man in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were intelligent and determined, and when he looked at her, she felt like he actually saw her as a person, not just a problem to be solved or a woman to be managed. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "You could just wire for your money, take it, and leave." "You do not owe me anything." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I told you about my father. What I did not say was that I was there when Holloway cheated him. I was 25, thought I was smart enough to see through any trick. But I could not prove what he did, and I could not stop it. I had to watch my father lose everything and know I was helpless. Maybe I cannot change what happened then, but I can do something now, and maybe that matters." The honesty in his voice made Grace's throat tight. "It matters to me," she said, "more than I can say." "Then let me do this," Benjamin said. "Let me help." Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. They spent the rest of the morning planning. Benjamin explained the finer points of poker strategy, telling her what to watch for if she was observing the game. He described the tells that different players had, the way Holloway in particular would touch his collar when he was bluffing. Grace absorbed it all, asking sharp questions that made Benjamin smile. "You have a quick mind," he said with approval. "Your father taught you well." "He taught me to think for myself," Grace agreed, "though he probably would have thrashed me for what I did last night." "You were desperate and trying to save your home," Benjamin said. "That is not something to be ashamed of. Holloway is the one who should be ashamed, preying on people when they are vulnerable." The telegraph office sent word around noon that Benjamin's money had arrived. He collected it, counted it carefully, and then they walked together toward the Silver Dollar Saloon. Grace's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Everything depended on the next few hours. The saloon was quieter during the day, with only a handful of patrons nursing drinks. Holloway was there, sitting at the same table as the night before, playing a casual game with two other men. He looked up when Benjamin and Grace entered, and his eyes narrowed. "Miss Vance," he said with false courtesy, "I am surprised to see you back here. I would have thought you would be busy packing your things." "Mr. Holloway," Benjamin said, stepping forward before Grace could respond. "My name is Benjamin Walsh, and I have a proposition for you." Holloway looked Benjamin up and down, taking in the worn trail clothes and the dust still clinging to his boots. "I do not do business with drifters. Not even drifters with $2,000 and information about the Northern Pacific's expansion plans," Benjamin asked calmly. That got Holloway's attention. He sat up straighter, his cards forgotten. "What kind of information?" "The kind that tells you exactly which land parcels they are planning to buy up in the next 6 months, Benjamin said. "The kind that could make a smart investor very rich if he knew where to buy before they started making offers." It was a complete fabrication, but Benjamin delivered it with such confidence that even Grace almost believed him. Holloway's eyes gleamed with greed. "And why would you share this information with me?" Holloway asked suspiciously. "Because I want something you have got," Benjamin said. "The deed to the Vance ranch. You won it last night, but it has not been registered yet. I know because I checked this morning." "That deed is worth a lot of money," Holloway said slowly. "And my information is worth a lot more," Benjamin countered. "But I am willing to play for it. One hand straight poker, your deed against my stake and my information. If you win, you get everything. If I win, Miss Vance gets her ranch back and you still walk away with whatever is in the pot." Holloway stroked his chin, clearly calculating. Grace could see the wheels turning in his mind. He thought he was the better player, thought he could win easily against a cowboy. And the promise of insider railroad information was too tempting to resist. "Show me your money first," Holloway said. Benjamin pulled out the bank draft and laid it on the table. $2,000, more money than most people in Portland saw in 5 years. Holloway's tongue darted out to wet his lips. "All right," he said finally. "One hand, but ideal." "Fair enough as long as we use a new deck," Benjamin said. "Still sealed." Holloway's face tightened, but he could not object without looking suspicious. He called the bartender over and had him bring an unopened deck of cards. The other men at the table moved away, sensing something big was about to happen. Other patrons began to gather, forming a loose circle around the table. Grace stood behind Benjamin, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Everything she owned, everything she had left of her family, rested on the next few minutes. She tried to pray but found she could not form the words. Instead, she watched Holloway's hands as he broke the seal on the deck and shuffled. The man was good, she had to admit. His hands moved with practiced ease, the cards flowing like water. But Benjamin had been right about the tell. When Holloway dealt the cards, his hand went to his collar twice, adjusting it unnecessarily. He was nervous, which meant he was planning something. Benjamin picked up his cards with steady hands. Grace could not see what he had, but his expression never changed. Holloway looked at his own cards and allowed himself a small smile. "Before we begin betting," Benjamin said calmly, "I want everyone here to witness that this is a fair game for the deed to the Vance ranch, currently in Mr. Holloway's possession. If I win, he signs it over immediately." "Agreed." "Agreed," Holloway said confidently. "And when I win, you hand over everything, including the railroad information." "Of course," Benjamin said smoothly. The betting began. Holloway opened aggressively, pushing a large stack of chips into the center of the table. Benjamin matched him without hesitation and raised. Grace's heart climbed into her throat. Back and forth it went, the pot growing larger with each round. Holloway's confidence seemed to grow with every bet. He touched his collar again, that tell Benjamin had mentioned, but this time he was smiling. Finally, Benjamin pushed the last of his chips forward. "I am all in," he said quietly. "Call," Holloway said immediately, his smile widening into something predatory. "Let us see what you have got, Cowboy." Benjamin laid down his cards one by one, a straight flush, 9 through king of spades. It was a spectacular hand, the kind most players never saw in a lifetime of poker. The crowd around the table gasped and began to murmur excitedly, but Holloway was laughing. "Bad luck, friend," he said, and he laid down his own cards with a flourish. A royal flush, 10 through ace of hearts. The best possible hand in poker, unbeatable by any other combination. Grace felt her knees go weak. It was impossible. The odds of both players having such strong hands in the same deal were astronomical, which meant exactly what she had suspected. Holloway had cheated. But Benjamin was not looking at the cards. He was looking at Holloway's sleeves, at the way they hung just slightly too loose around his wrists. And then, moving faster than Grace would have thought possible, he reached across the table and grabbed Holloway's left arm, yanking it forward sharply. 2 cards fell from a hidden pocket up Holloway's sleeve and landed face up on the table. The 10 and ace of hearts, duplicates of 2 cards already in Holloway's supposed winning hand. The saloon erupted in angry shouts. Men who had lost to Holloway, men who had suspected but never been able to prove it, surged forward. Holloway tried to stand, tried to run, but rough hands grabbed him and shoved him back into his chair. "You cheating snake," someone shouted. "How many of us have you robbed?" "I did not. Those cards are not mine," Holloway sputtered, but no one was listening. Benjamin stood up, his expression hard. By the rules of poker, when a player is caught cheating, he forfeits the entire pot and any side bets. "Mr. Holloway, you have been caught red-handed with cards up your sleeve. The hand is void, and you owe Miss Vance her deed." "The hell I do," Holloway snapped, trying to push away from the table, but the angry crowd held him in place. "Unless you would prefer we call the marshal," Benjamin suggested. "I am sure he would be very interested to know that you have been cheating at cards. That is illegal in Oregon territory, as you well know. Could land you in prison for several years." Holloway's face had gone pale. He looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him and realized he had no way out. His hand shook as he reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded deed to the Vance ranch. "Here," he said, practically throwing it at Benjamin. "Take it." "But that information you promised." "There is no information," Benjamin said calmly, picking up the deed. "The Northern Pacific has not made any expansion plans that I know of. I lied to get you to play. But then again, you cheated, so I suppose we are both guilty of deception. The difference is mine is not actually a crime." The crowd roared with laughter at that. Holloway lunged to his feet, his face purple with rage, but several men grabbed him and hauled him toward the door. "I think Mr. Holloway needs some fresh air," one of them said grimly. "Maybe a long walk to think about his behavior." They dragged him out of the saloon while he cursed and threatened. Grace barely noticed. She was staring at the deed in Benjamin's hands, unable to quite believe it was real. Benjamin turned to her and held it out. "I believe this belongs to you, Miss Vance." Grace took it with trembling hands. Her name was there, written in her father's careful script. The boundaries of the ranch, the creek, the timber stands, all of it described in legal language. She had been so sure she would never see this document again. "Thank you," she whispered, and then louder, "Thank you. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not owe me anything," Benjamin said, but he was smiling now, the hard edge gone from his expression. "Though I would not say no to a tour of that ranch. I have not had steady work in a while, and I am getting tired of the cattle drives." Grace looked up at him, at this man who had risked everything to help a stranger, and felt something shift in her chest. It was too soon to call it anything more than gratitude and the beginning of trust, but there was definitely something there. "I think that can be arranged," she said, returning his smile. "Though I should warn you, the place is probably a mess. I have been trying to run it alone since my father died, and I am not sure I have been doing a very good job." "Then it is good I am offering to help," Benjamin said. He offered her his arm again. "Let us go get your things from Mrs. Chen's and head out to your ranch. I am curious to see this land that Holloway wanted so badly." They walked out of the saloon together into the bright afternoon sunlight. Grace felt lighter than she had in months, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The deed was safe in her pocket, pressed close to her heart. She had her home back. She had a future again. The ride out to the ranch took about 2 hours. Benjamin had a good horse, a gray gelding named Smoke, stabled at the livery. Grace had sold her horse weeks ago to buy supplies, so Benjamin paid for a rental mare that Grace could ride. As they left Portland behind and headed into the rolling hills of the Willamette Valley, Grace felt herself relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. "Tell me about your father," Benjamin said as they rode side by side along the dirt road. Grace smiled sadly. "He was a good man. Stubborn, my mother always said, but good. He came out here in 1862 during the land rush, staked his claim and built the ranch from nothing. He always said this valley was the most beautiful place on earth, and he was right. The creek runs clear and cold straight down from the mountains, and the grass grows thick enough to support twice as many cattle as we ever kept. He wanted to keep it small, manageable. He said he would rather have a life than just a business." "Sounds like someone I would have liked to know," Benjamin said. "He would have liked you too," Grace said, and she meant it. Her father had valued honesty and hard work above everything else, and Benjamin seemed to embody both. "What about your family? You mentioned your mother and father, but are there others?" "A sister," Benjamin said. "Sarah. She is married now, living in Sacramento with her husband and 2 little girls. I see them when I can, but I have been on the move a lot the last few years. After we lost the timber claim, there did not seem to be much point in staying in one place." "And now?" Grace asked. Benjamin looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Now I think maybe there might be a reason to settle down after all." They rode in companionable silence after that, but Grace was acutely aware of him beside her. She kept stealing glances when she thought he was not looking, noticing little things. The way he sat his horse with easy confidence, the strength in his hands on the reins, the way his eyes constantly scanned the landscape as if cataloging everything he saw. He was attractive, she admitted to herself, but more than that, he was kind. that was rarer and more valuable than simple good looks. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill. Grace's heart swelled with love and relief at the sight of it. The house was a simple two-story structure made of timber from their own land, weathered gray by wind and rain. The barn was larger, built to house cattle during the worst of winter. Fencing marked out pastures where grass grew tall, and beyond it all, the mountains rose in blue-purple majesty against the sky. "It is beautiful," Benjamin said quietly, and the genuine appreciation in his voice made Grace warm with pride. "It is home," she said simply. As they rode closer, Grace could see that things were in worse shape than she had hoped. Fences sagged in places where she had not had time to make repairs. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds had taken over the kitchen garden her mother had planted years ago. It was going to take a lot of work to bring the place back to what it had been. Benjamin seemed to be thinking the same thing. "You have been trying to manage all this alone?" he asked as they dismounted in front of the house. "I had 2 ranch hands, but I had to let them go 6 weeks ago when I could not afford to pay them any more," Grace admitted. "I have been doing what I can, but there is just too much for one person." "Well, you are not alone anymore," Benjamin said firmly. "At least not for as long as you want help. I meant what I said about looking for steady work." Grace looked at him searchingly. "You would really stay?" "Work for room and board until I can afford to pay proper wages." "I would stay," Benjamin said, meeting her eyes steadily. "Though I will be honest with you, Grace, it is not just about the work. I like you. I think you are brave and smart, and I would like to get to know you better. But I will not take advantage of you being grateful or in a difficult situation. If you want me to stay, I will work hard and keep things proper. If you want me to leave, I will go right now with no hard feelings." Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she appreciated his directness. Too many men would have tried to manipulate the situation, but Benjamin was laying everything out honestly and leaving the choice to her. "I would like you to stay," she said quietly, "and I would like to get to know you better too." Benjamin's smile was like sunrise. "All right then. Let us get these horses settled and you can show me around. Then tomorrow we can start figuring out what needs doing first." The barn was dim and cool inside, smelling of hay and old wood. Benjamin helped Grace untack the horses and get them into stalls with feed and water. As they worked side by side, Grace found herself stealing glances at him again. His sleeves were rolled up, showing muscled forearms, and he moved with the efficient grace of someone who had spent his life doing physical work. "You are staring," Benjamin said without looking up from the saddle he was hanging on the wall. Grace flushed. "I am sorry. I just cannot quite believe you are real, that any of this is real." Benjamin finished with the saddle and turned to face her. "It is real, all of it. You have got your ranch back, and I am here to help if you want me. That is what matters." He was standing close enough that Grace could feel the warmth radiating from him. Her heart was beating fast, and she was suddenly very aware that they were alone in the dim barn, that she barely knew this man despite everything he had done for her. She should probably step back, maintain some proper distance. Instead, she found herself stepping forward. "Benjamin, I do not know how to thank you for what you did. You risked everything for me, and you did not even know me." "I am starting to know you," Benjamin said softly, "and what I am learning I like very much." He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. His palm was warm and calloused, and Grace found herself leaning into the touch without thinking about it. "Is this all right?" he asked, his voice low. "Tell me if I am overstepping." "You are not," Grace whispered. Her pulse was racing now. Anticipation and nervousness and something warmer all tangled together. Benjamin leaned down slowly, his eyes on hers, giving her every chance to say no. When his lips brushed against hers, soft and questioning, Grace felt something ignite in her chest. She had been kissed before, awkward fumbling attempts at church socials with boys she had known all her life. This was nothing like those experiences. This was gentle and sweet, and made her feel like her knees might give out. When they finally pulled apart, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since I first saw you on that sidewalk looking like your whole world had ended." "It had ended," Grace said, slightly breathless. "And then you gave it back to me." "We gave it back to each other," Benjamin corrected. "You trusted me enough to let me try. That took courage." They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to break the spell. Finally, Grace stepped back reluctantly. "I should show you the house," she said. "Get you settled in one of the spare rooms." "Lead the way," Benjamin said, though his eyes were still warm on hers in a way that made her stomach flutter. The house was dusty from 3 months of Grace living there alone and not having time for much beyond basic cleaning. She showed Benjamin through the ground floor with its main room, kitchen, and her father's old office. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms. Her parents had hoped for a large family, but Grace had been their only child to survive past infancy. "You can take either of the spare rooms," Grace said, opening doors to show him. Both were furnished simply with beds, dressers, and washstands. "They have not been used in a while, but the mattresses are good and the linens are clean." "This one will do fine," Benjamin said, choosing the room at the front of the house. "It has a good view of the approach, old habit from sleeping in places where you need to know if someone is coming." Grace nodded, understanding. The West could be dangerous, and a man traveling alone learned to be cautious. "I will bring up some fresh water for washing. Dinner will not be anything fancy, I am afraid. Supplies are pretty low." "I am not particular," Benjamin assured her. "And tomorrow, I can ride into town for supplies if you give me a list." They spent the rest of the evening settling into an awkward but not unpleasant domesticity. Grace made a simple meal of beans and cornbread, apologizing for the meagerness of it. Benjamin ate like it was a feast and insisted on helping with the dishes afterward. They talked about practical things, planning out what needed to be done first on the ranch. The fences were the priority, Benjamin argued, because without good fences they could not keep livestock safe. Grace agreed, though she pointed out that they did not currently have livestock beyond the 2 horses. "Then we will need to use some of what is left of my money to buy a few head of cattle," Benjamin said. "Nothing fancy, just enough to start building the herd back up." "I cannot ask you to invest your money in my ranch," Grace protested. "You are not asking. I am offering," Benjamin said firmly. "Grace, if I am going to stay here and work this place with you, then I want to have a stake in making it succeed. Let me help properly, not just as hired labor." Grace bit her lip, considering. It made sense, but it also felt like a huge thing to accept. "What would you want in return? A percentage of the profits?" "Eventually, maybe," Benjamin said. "For now, I just want to see this place thrive. We can work out the details as we go. I trust you, Grace." "I hope you are starting to trust me too." "I do," Grace said, and she meant it. She barely knew him, but Benjamin Walsh had already proven himself in ways that mattered. "All right, we will pool our resources and work together. Partners." "Partners," Benjamin agreed, and they shook on it like men doing business, though the touch of his hand sent warmth up Grace's arm. That night, lying in her bed in her childhood room, Grace stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had lost everything. Now she had it all back, plus a partner she was rapidly developing feelings for. It was too much, too fast. She should be more cautious. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Benjamin's face, the way he had looked at her in the barn, and her heart insisted that this was right. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Benjamin proved to be as hard-working as he had promised. He was up before dawn every day, tackling whatever needed doing with steady determination. Together, they mended fences, repaired the barn door, and cleared the weeds from the garden. Benjamin rode into town and came back with supplies and 6 head of young cattle, heifers that would form the foundation of a new herd. They talked constantly as they worked, learning each other's stories and opinions. Benjamin told her about his years working cattle drives, about the time he had been thrown from a spooked horse and broken 3 ribs, about the night he had helped deliver a breech calf in a lightning storm. Grace shared memories of her childhood on the ranch, of her mother's fierce determination to make a home in the wilderness, of her father teaching her to ride and shoot and keep accounts. "You loved them very much," Benjamin observed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "I did," Grace said softly. "I still do. Sometimes I wake up and forget they are gone just for a moment. Then it all comes back." Benjamin reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. These quiet moments together had become Grace's favorite part of each day. They were careful to maintain propriety, mindful of how things would look if neighbors came calling. Benjamin slept in his own room and never entered hers. They did not kiss again, though Grace found herself wanting to more and more. But she appreciated his restraint, his respect for her reputation. It made her trust him even more. On Sundays, they rode into Portland for church services. Grace introduced Benjamin to the neighbors and friends who asked after her. She watched him win people over with his quiet competence and honest manner. Mrs. Chen beamed at them both and invited them for dinner, where she served a spectacular Chinese feast and told Benjamin he had better take good care of Grace or answer to her. "I plan to," Benjamin promised, and the way he looked at Grace when he said, it made her flush with pleasure. After a month, the ranch was starting to look like itself again. The fences were solid, the barn was repaired, and the garden was producing vegetables. The 6 heifers were settling in well, and Benjamin was talking about buying a bull in the fall so they could start breeding. One warm June evening, they were sitting on the porch again when Benjamin cleared his throat. "Grace, I need to tell you something," he said, and there was nervousness in his voice that immediately made her anxious. "What is it?" she asked. "I have been here over a month now," Benjamin said, turning to face her. "And every day I like you more. Every day I am more certain that I want to stay here, not just until the ranch is back on its feet, but permanently. I am falling in love with you, Grace Vance. Actually, I think I have already fallen, and I need you to know that before we go any further." Grace's breath caught. She had felt it too, this growing connection between them, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I care about you too," she said carefully. "Very much. But Benjamin, we have only known each other a month. Is that enough time to be sure?" "It is enough time for me," Benjamin said. "I am not saying we need to rush into anything. I am just saying I want you to know where my heart is. I want to court you properly, Grace. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch, but only if that is what you want too." Grace looked at this man who had given her back her future, who worked tirelessly beside her, who made her laugh and feel safe and want things she had not let herself want since her parents died. She thought about the way her heart raced when he smiled at her, about how empty the days felt when he rode into town without her, about how right it felt when he took her hand. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady and sure. "Yes, I want that too. I am falling in love with you, Benjamin Walsh, and it terrifies me because it is so fast and I do not want to be foolish again. But I cannot deny what I feel." Benjamin's face lit up with joy. He reached for her hands, holding them both between his own. "You are not being foolish. This is real, what we have. I feel it in my bones." "So do I," Grace admitted. "So what do we do now?" "Now we take our time," Benjamin said. "We keep working together, keep learning about each other. We court properly, let people see that this is serious. And when we are both ready, when there is no doubt left in either of our minds, we get married and make this ranch truly ours. Together." "That sounds perfect," Grace said, and she leaned forward to kiss him, slow and sweet under the darkening sky. The summer passed in a haze of work and growing love. Benjamin was an attentive suitor, bringing Grace wildflowers from the meadow, sitting with her on the porch every evening, telling her stories that made her laugh until her sides hurt. They went on proper chaperoned outings, attending social events in Portland with Mrs. Chen or other respectable friends keeping watch. But Grace's favorite times were still the everyday moments working side by side. The way Benjamin would brush past her in the barn and let his hand linger on her waist. The way he looked at her across the dinner table, like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met. The way he listened when she talked about her plans and dreams for the ranch, taking her ideas seriously and building on them. In August, Benjamin rode to Sacramento to visit his sister and tell her about Grace. He came back with glowing reports of Sarah's approval and an invitation for Grace to visit as soon as she could. "She is dying to meet you," Benjamin said, grinning. "I think I talked about you for about 6 hours straight. My brother-in-law finally told me to shut up and go propose already." "And what did you tell him?" Grace asked, her heart fluttering. "I told him I was waiting for the perfect moment," Benjamin said, suddenly serious. "I told him I wanted everything to be right. In September, they drove the cattle to market and got a good price despite the small size of the herd. With the profits, they were able to buy more livestock and pay off the remaining mortgage on the ranch." Grace cried when she made the final payment, tears of relief and joy that Benjamin wiped away gently with his thumbs. "It is really yours now," he said softly, "free and clear." "Ours," Grace corrected. "Benjamin, I want to make you a legal partner in the ranch. You have invested your money and your labor, and you should have your name on the deed too." "Are you sure?" Benjamin asked. "That is a big step." "I am sure," Grace said. "I trust you completely. I love you, and I want us to be true partners in every way." "Then yes," Benjamin said. "I would be honored." They went to the land office the next day and had the deed amended to include Benjamin's name. Walking out with the updated paperwork, Grace felt like she was floating. She had gone from losing everything to having more than she had ever dreamed, all in the space of 6 months. October brought the first hints of winter, frost sparkling on the grass in the mornings. Grace and Benjamin worked to prepare the ranch for the cold months ahead, stocking hay in the barn and making sure the house was tight against drafts. They were carrying firewood into the house one crisp afternoon when Benjamin suddenly stopped. "Grace," he said, setting down his armload of wood. "I know I said I was waiting for the perfect moment, but I have realized something. Every moment with you is perfect. I do not need some grand romantic gesture. I just need you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's hands flew to her mouth. "Grace Vance," Benjamin said, dropping to one knee right there in the yard with wood chips and autumn leaves scattered around them. "You are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever met. You make me want to be better, work harder, build something lasting. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me be your husband for the rest of our lives?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but lovely. Grace felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Benjamin stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. He slid the ring onto her finger and then kissed her with all the passion they had been holding back for months. Grace kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Benjamin said. "My Grace, my brave, beautiful Grace." They were married in November in the small church in Portland, with what felt like half the town in attendance. Mrs. Chen cried through the whole ceremony. Benjamin's sister Sarah came up from Sacramento with her family, and she and Grace bonded instantly. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Benjamin had picked that morning despite the cold. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks again. They were happy tears this time, pure joy with no shadow of grief. The reception was held at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, with tables of food and music from a fiddle player who knew every dance tune ever written. Grace danced with her new husband, with neighbors and friends, and finally with Mrs. Chen herself, who held her tight and whispered, "Your mother would be so proud of you, child." "You found a good man." "I know," Grace whispered back. "I am so lucky." That night they returned to the ranch as man and wife. Benjamin carried Grace over the threshold of the house they now officially shared, both of them laughing. Inside, a fire was burning in the hearth, courtesy of Sarah, who had ridden out earlier to prepare things. The bedroom upstairs, which had been Grace's alone, was now theirs together. Benjamin set Grace down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Grace said honestly. "6 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I have everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know I wanted." "Me too," Benjamin said. "You gave me a home, Grace. A real home, not just a place to sleep. You gave me a future." "We gave each other a future," Grace said, echoing words he had spoken months ago. "Together." They made love for the first time that night, slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same patience and care they had brought to learning each other's hearts. Grace had been nervous, her only knowledge coming from whispered conversations with married friends and her mother's vague advice years ago. But Benjamin was gentle and attentive, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When it was over, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Grace's head on Benjamin's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "That was perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect," Benjamin corrected, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Sleep now, my love. We have the rest of our lives ahead of us." Grace drifted off to sleep feeling more content than she had ever been, wrapped in her husband's arms in the house where she had been born, ready to build the future they had both earned. The winter that followed was harsh, with snow and ice making travel difficult. But the ranch was well prepared, and Grace and Benjamin were happy to be snowed in together. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, playing cards, making plans for the spring. They made love frequently, learning and exploring, growing more comfortable with each other's bodies. By February, Grace suspected she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure before telling Benjamin, wanting to be certain. When she finally shared the news on a bright March morning as they were eating breakfast, Benjamin nearly knocked over his coffee in his excitement. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" he asked, his face glowing with joy. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Grace said, laughing at his reaction. "But yes, I am fairly certain. The baby should come in October if I am calculating right." Benjamin came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. We are going to have a baby, our baby. Grace, you have made me the happiest man alive. We made this baby together, Grace said, resting her head against his chest. I am scared, but I am so happy too. You do not need to be scared, Benjamin said, though his voice was a little shaky too. I will be with you every step of the way. We will get through this together, just like everything else. And they did. As spring warmed into summer and Grace's belly grew round with their child, Benjamin fussed over her constantly. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work too hard in the garden. Grace found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood he was just worried. This baby meant everything to both of them. In August, they drove into Portland to see the doctor, a gruff but kind man named Dr. Morrison, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. He confirmed that Grace was healthy and the baby seemed to be developing well. You have got a strong girl here, he told Benjamin. She will do just fine. Babies were born on the frontier long before doctors came west, and they will keep being born long after we are all gone. When should we expect the baby? Benjamin asked, holding Grace's hand tightly. Late October, early November, Dr. Morrison said. Make sure you have someone who can help when the time comes. It would be good to have an experienced woman nearby. They arranged for Mrs. Chen to come stay at the ranch when Grace's time was near. Sarah also promised to come up from Sacramento if she could. Though with her own 2 young daughters to care for, she could not make guarantees. The baby came on a crisp October evening, almost exactly a year after Benjamin had proposed. Grace's labor started late in the afternoon, and Mrs. Chen took charge immediately, sending Benjamin to boil water and gather clean linens and generally stay out of the way. He paced the downstairs like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from the bedroom above. Grace labored through the night, Mrs. Chen coaching her through each contraction with calm authority. It was painful and exhausting and frightening, but Grace held onto the thought of meeting her baby, of seeing Benjamin hold their child. That kept her going through the worst of it. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, the baby slipped into Mrs. Chen's waiting hands. A thin wail filled the room and Grace sobbed with relief and joy. You have a son, Mrs. Chen said, smiling as she wrapped the baby in a clean blanket. A fine, healthy boy with good lungs. She placed the baby in Grace's arms, and Grace stared down at the tiny, red-faced creature in wonder. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably be blue like Benjamin's. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Can I get Benjamin? She asked Mrs. Chen. Of course, dear. Let me clean you up first. A few minutes later, Benjamin practically ran into the room, his face pale with worry. Grace, are you all right? I heard screaming and then crying and I did not know. I am fine, Grace said, smiling through her exhaustion. Come meet your son. Benjamin approached the bed slowly like he was afraid to get too close. When he saw the baby, his face crumpled with emotion. Our son, he whispered. We have a son. Do you want to hold him? Grace asked. Benjamin nodded wordlessly. Grace showed him how to support the baby's head, and Benjamin took his son with infinite care, cradling him against his chest. Tears were streaming down his face. Hello, little one, he said softly. I am your father, and I promise I am going to take such good care of you. You and your mother, you are my whole world. Grace felt tears sliding down her own cheeks watching them. This was what she had lost and found again, what she had nearly thrown away in that card game. Not just the ranch, but the possibility of this moment, this family, this love. What should we name him? Benjamin asked, looking up at her. Grace had been thinking about this for months. I want to name him after my father, she said. Thomas Walsh. Thomas, Benjamin repeated, smiling down at the baby. It is perfect. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the ranch. You are going to love it here. They spent the next weeks in a haze of new parenthood. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, but still demanding in the way all infants were. Grace was exhausted but had never been happier. Benjamin was a devoted father, getting up with her in the night for feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always got Thomas to stop fussing. Sarah came to visit when Thomas was a month old, bringing her daughters to meet their new cousin. She and Grace became even closer, staying up late talking while the children slept. Sarah pulled Grace aside one evening. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, her eyes serious. "When Benjamin came to tell me about you last year, I was worried. He had been so hurt after what happened with Father, so closed off from everyone. I was afraid he would never let himself be happy again. But Grace, you saved him. You brought my brother back to life. Thank you for that." Grace felt her throat tighten with emotion. "He saved me too," she said honestly. "I was drowning and he threw me a line. Everything good in my life right now exists because of him." "No," Sarah said gently. "It exists because you were brave enough to trust him. You both saved each other. That is what the best marriages are." The years that followed were good ones. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. When he was 3, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. 2 years after that came another son, William, called Will by everyone. The house that had seemed so empty when Grace was alone was now full of laughter and noise and love. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Benjamin's skill with cattle and Grace's head for business made them an effective team. They bought more land, expanded the herd, and became one of the most successful ranches in the valley. But they never lost sight of what mattered most. Family dinners every night, Sundays at church, community gatherings where their children played with the neighbors' children. Grace sometimes thought back to that terrible night in the saloon, to the moment when the cards had fallen from her hands and she thought she had lost everything. She thought about how wrong she had been. She had not lost everything that night. She had lost land and a deed, things that could be won back. What she had actually gained was so much more valuable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Grace with a trip to the coast. Mrs. Chen came to watch the children, and Benjamin and Grace spent 3 days in a little seaside town, walking on the beach and remembering what it had been like when it was just the two of them. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked as they sat watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. "Staying here, tying yourself to the ranch and me. You could have gone anywhere, done anything." Benjamin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I went exactly where I wanted to go, and I did exactly what I wanted to do. Grace, that night I met you outside the saloon, I was drifting. I had money in my pocket, but no purpose, no home, no future worth caring about. You gave me all of that. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "You gave me back my life," Grace said. "Literally. I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not stepped in. Nothing good." "Then I guess we are even," Benjamin said, smiling. "Two people who needed each other, who found each other at exactly the right moment. That is not luck, Grace. That is fate." Grace laughed and kissed him, tasting salt air and love. "I will take fate," she said, "as long as it keeps giving me you." When they returned home, the children mobbed them with hugs and stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. Thomas, now 10 years old and tall for his age, announced that he wanted to learn to break horses like his father. Rose, 7 and fierce, declared that she was going to run the ranch someday. 5-year-old Will just wanted to know if they had brought him anything from the beach. Grace looked at her family, at her husband and her children, and the home they had built together, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what that card game had almost cost her. This was what Benjamin had won back and given her. Not just land and a house, but a life worth living, a future full of promise and a love that grew stronger with every passing year. 20 years after that fateful night, Grace and Benjamin sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset, just as they had done thousands of times before. Thomas was married now with children of his own, working a parcel of ranch land Benjamin had deeded to him. Rose was studying business at a women's college in Portland, determined to expand the family ranch into new markets. Will was preparing to go to university to study veterinary medicine. "We did well," Benjamin said, taking Grace's hand. His hair was gray now, and his face was lined with age, but his eyes were the same stormy blue-gray that had captivated her decades ago. "We did," Grace agreed. Her own hair was silver, and she moved a little more slowly these days, but she still felt young when she looked at her husband. "Thank you, Benjamin, for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for trusting me," Benjamin said. "That night when you took my arm and let me help you, you changed my whole life. I love you, Grace Walsh. I have loved you for over 20 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left." "I love you too," Grace said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "My cowboy, my hero, my husband." They sat together watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple, the mountains standing eternal in the distance, the ranch thriving around them. Somewhere in the barn, cattle lowed softly. In the house behind them, the clock chimed the hour. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in every way except that they were together, and they were home. Grace thought about that frightened young woman who had lost everything in a card game, who had stood on a sidewalk in Portland thinking her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, that the man who stepped out of the shadows would become her everything, that the loss would lead to a gain beyond imagining, that sometimes the worst night of your life is just the beginning of the best part of your story. But maybe that girl did not need to be told. Maybe she had known on some level when she took Benjamin Walsh's arm and chose to trust him. Maybe that was the real gamble, the one that actually mattered. Not the cards on a felt table, but the decision to believe in the possibility of something better, to accept help when it was offered, to open her heart even when she was terrified. Grace squeezed Benjamin's hand and he squeezed back, a silent conversation they had perfected over decades of marriage. The sun sank below the horizon, and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges, joys and sorrows, all the complications of life. But tonight was simple. They were together, they were loved, and they were home. And that was worth more than any card game ever played, worth more than all the gold in California, worth more than anything else in the world. Grace had lost everything once, and Benjamin had won it back and given it to her. But what they had won together, the life and the love and the family they had built, that was something no card game could ever give or take away. That was theirs, earned through trust and work and devotion, and it would last forever.